Okay, we're back here to talk about North Korea a little bit. President Trump had a conversation with the leader of South Korea, and from the readout we got of that conversation, apparently said he's open to talks with North Korea under the, quote, right circumstances. Former commander of the Middle East during the Iraq War, retired General Anthony Zinni joins us now. What do you make of that, General? Should we be open to those types of conversations?
I think so. I mean, but I think it has to be understood that the talks have to deal with the nuclear issue. That can't be off the table. I think it's fine that South Korea may be talking about Olympics and maybe family visits. I think President Moon did an excellent job in putting these talks in perspective. He said that he doesn't believe that Kim Jong-un would be there if it wasn't for the president's strong stand, and that the real issue is denuclearization, and that has to be addressed at talks that were more serious than what's going on now. He also mentioned the strength of the alliance between the U.S. and South Korea. So I think these talks that are ongoing are put in perspective very clearly by President Moon, and we can't be participating in anything that doesn't really deal with the key issue.
Speaking of putting things in perspective, this does put it in a perspective of how the president, our president, President Trump, handles things in terms of policy, rather than how he talks about things either publicly or more often on Twitter. I mean, when he's going on Twitter and bragging about who has the bigger butt, and people say, boy, what are we getting ourselves into here? But what do you make of how he's actually handled this situation policy-wise? Today's pronouncement seems quite different than that.
I think the policy's been handled in an excellent way. I think it's been made clear that we have military options, right, and quite a range of military options. I think it's clear where we see the red lines and what's not acceptable. I think the president's made that quite clear, and Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson. And I think we've done a lot to ensure that it's clear to North Korea that our allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, and others, are with us and behind us in this position.
Are things getting better? Is there any kind of legitimate thawing? Because you brought up the Olympic agreement, for example, where the North and the South had those meetings in the DMZ, and North Korea is going to send a delegation to the South Korean Olympics. You know, there were some hardliners who looked at that in the foreign policy community, said, it's just a bunch of nonsense. It's really propaganda on their part, and they're just trying to buy themselves some time, the North Koreans, until after the Olympics. Whereas others said, well, no, maybe it is a legitimate sign of better times to come. What do you think?
I'm pessimistic. I really think that it was done in order to try to drive a wedge, maybe between us and our South Korean allies, which obviously is not going to work. It may be done so that Kim Jong-un looks like, he's willing to talk seriously, even though these talks aren't about really what the issue is. So I don't think these talks are designed to lead to anything. I think they're fine in terms of South Korea. There are other issues that they have. Again, family visits, maybe reducing tensions and that sort of thing. But the idea that this could lead to something more serious, I don't see that right now.
But we could, to the president's point, have talks at some level between American officials and North Korean officials. What would it take, do you think, to actually get us to that point?
Well, I think they have to be willing to put their nuclear capability on the table.
Right.
I mean, that has to be the principal issue. I also think that when we talk about North Korea talking to the United States, remember that the command in South Korea is a United Nations command.
Right.
That's the command that fought the Korean War. And I think we should ensure that this is an international issue, not just an issue that plays into Kim Jong-un's hands, that he wants us, because of his prestige, to be North Korean U.S.
We do have to go because of time. General Zinni, thank you very much. We'll be right back.